Thought we were beginning. What the fuck? Oh, there
We
it is.
are. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, David Strege, here on Inside Movies Galore, where we are on episode 60, where we are here going to discuss Kurosawa's film from 1970, Dodes'ka-den.
Dodes'ka-den.
Correct. So, Brandon, since you suggested this movie, why don't you give us a little bit of a
Synopsis.
intro to what this film is kind of about?
Oh, well, to me, it's about life. It's the reason why I thought about this film originally was actually while we were watching Street Trash. A lot of those themes are not that different. It's a little bit less meanness per se, but the idea is that life still goes on, no matter where and no matter what is going on around.
Okay.
And this one is very well illustrated. I personally think that out of Kurosawa's films, this one definitely had the most entertaining cover of all of them. And is definitely one of the more strange films that he has done.
Okay.
It was strange.
And
Strange.
where did you first see this film, by the way?
Actually, was back probably around the time it came out on Criterion.
Okay.
I've been trying to get a full Kurosawa collection as I can, and it was on my list. So when I got it, of course, I just opened it and tried to watch it right away. I've watched most of my Kurosawa films right away. I still have a few I have yet to see, some of the ones in the Eclipse series and such, like the pre-war films and stuff like that. But I'm a big fan of his work, so I had to catch it. And to me, it struck me as something totally different than what I'm used to seeing from Kurosawa.
Okay.
Because my initial experience with Kurosawa was more the action-y, with the exception of, Seven Samurai, Sanjiro, Yojimbo. Those are staples of Kurosawa.
Okay.
But this one was very different.
Celeste, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Hooray.
Was this a first-time watch for you?
It was. I'd never actually heard of it before.
Okay. And what was your response to the film?
It was odd. It was a very strange film, but I found myself enjoying it. Like, I really like character building in movies, so the parts with really slow character building never bother me. So if the whole movie kind of feels like that, which it kind of did to me, I liked it and I went along with it.
Okay. And did you have a favorite scene from the film that you'd like to share with?
Yes. The first scene with the trolley guy, where he starts it, it was filmed in such a way that you can see what he's seeing in his head just through his reenactment and the music was so beautiful and it was so like uplifting that it made you feel like the happiness he was experiencing that moment, even though you could see his surroundings didn't match that, and I just loved that.
Okay. Awesome. Katie, why don't was this a first time watch for you?
Which Katie?
Yes, it was.
The
Oh yeah, sorry.
Katie, why don't you tell me what your experience was with this?
It was kind of a tough one for me to stick with. I kind of got bored, so yeah, it was like I had to sit and watch it like twice, and after I sort of made it through all the way, I had dozed off during a few parts, so it kind of didn't make sense. So I went to IMDb and I was reading about it there and reading some of the reviews, and then I kind of went back to certain scenes, just the things I felt like I missed or whatever. So and I feel like this is one of those movies that I think if I watched it again, and was able to stay awake the whole time. Like it's probably gets better the more times you watch it. But I did see, like what Brandon was saying about the similarities between this and Street Trash, like very different tones to those movies, but I could see the same type of storylines and the sort of the tandem stories that were happening within each of the movies. I noticed that. And I liked I still like the backdrop and the scenes, the scenery in Street Trash better than in this movie, but I really liked at the end they show those windows with the drawings of the trolleys, the real colorful drawings of the trolleys, like in the window thing, and I really liked that.
I believe they showed them in the beginning a little bit too.
Yeah, you could kind of see it too. Yeah, I liked how at the end it sort of rounded out with that, and it was kind of bookended by this guy doing his little trolley thing, which didn't fit, but it did. It was one of those things where it's like, oh, I get the symbolism there. I get kind of the idea of it, and how I liked how they sort of bookended the movie with that.
Okay. Red Raven, why don't you, is this a first time watch for you?
Yeah, this was a first time watch, and I felt it was also hard to watch. At one point I was like falling asleep. But I found it was kind of depressing at times. Okay. With like the niece and the way she was being treated like by her uncle, and how they were making her work all the time, and then she was like being abused by the uncle, and I just found that parts of it were kind of sad, the way the people in the movie were living.
Okay.
And but I also found it was neat. There was many stories going on at once in the movie. It wasn't just one story. It was like there were several stories going on at once. There was also like an older boy or an older man and a little boy, and they were like in a car dreaming about their house that they were going to own one day, and they were like imagining it with like a fence and everything and like a gate and stuff like that.
Okay. And did you have a favorite scene that you'd like to point out that and maybe that you might have liked a little bit more than one other?
I would say like the stuff with the trolley was pretty cool. I thought that was kind of neat.
Okay. Dustin, why don't you tell me, was this a first time watch for you?
Oh yeah, so I first saw this movie at about 5 o'clock today. It was a lot longer than I was kind of expecting, although I don't really know what I was expecting. At first, I really did not enjoy it. I think my first, when is this over, comes in at 30 or so minutes. But I could see the connections and parallels to Street Trash and some of the other films we had watched recently. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So it was a more serious attempt, like, dramatically, to try and tell a similar kind of story. And I ended up enjoying it towards the end. It may have just been kind of a, it's almost over, good. But that's when things started to kind of heat up. So I feel like some of the stuff could have been condensed somewhat. Or this is one of the issues I often have with foreign films. Like, I feel like I'm missing something. Like, somebody will make a big deal about something that seems trivial, and it'll be like a cultural thing. So I wonder if you have a different cultural background and set of sensibilities, if some of the stuff works more for you. Which is kind of funny with this one, because looking up information on it, this did very well internationally, but not in Japan. And Akira Kurosawa was so upset that it didn't do well in Japan that he attempted suicide, at least according to the Wikipedia page. And I was like, wow, geez. Although for that first 20 minutes, like, after having read that and then seeing the first 20 minutes or so of it, I was like, oh, all right.
Okay.
So,
Dane, was this a first-time watch for you?
It was indeed, and actually, it's my first Kurosawa film, which
me too.
I know I'm sad to say that because I feel like I'm really lagging behind with my world cinema. I mean, I'm really good with German expressionism, and I've seen some good French films, Italian films, and that kind of stuff. I just need more classic Japanese films. But yeah, this was a first time watch. I echo a lot of what Dustin said. It's one of those things. I've seen a lot of ensemble cast films, and I've seen a lot of these same themes covered before. I've seen them covered better, which is not to say that this was bad. I thought it was a good film. It just was definitely a slog to sit through, just because of the pacing. Which again, I can't be overly hard on it, because I know Japanese cinema of that era tends to be a bit slower paced than what we're used to in the West in this time period. And, there's a lot of, like Dustin said, a lot of culture.
A lot of what?
You cut out there, dude.
Yeah.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I think he was trying to say cultural landmarks / references.
Yeah. Just till he comes back, I'm gonna tell my view. So this was actually my first time seeing it as well, and I also read up a little bit on the background of some of the storyline to somewhat, kind of go along with it too. It was rather slow at pace, and I could definitely see where the junkyard aspect of the film ties in with the street trash and some of the films that we've done before as well. And my thing is, I feel like some of the stories left us with a little bit of unease, because I mean, you've got the two fellas who just seem to be wife swapping,
which goes nowhere really.
Yeah, that was weird.
Which is kind of weird. Like they go get drunk and then end up at each other's wives the next day. You've got the guy with the tick,
which goes nowhere.
Who they and you got the ladies who are kind of like the gossipers that are sitting around that washing well or wherever they do get their water from, and it's kind of a shanty little town. It's kind of desolate. You don't really get to see much of where the two guys go to work. And I think the one that I wish that I could have seen more on was the man who had almost like the dead eyes, and then his ex-wife supposedly started to come home. I wish I had seen more to that story, because I feel like that story was a hell of a lot more painful, the way that she was describing.
Yeah, I like the way that those actors, I think they did a really good job with each other. The story I really latched on to was with the father and son. The son dies of food poisoning, but they dream of a better life and a better house and that kind of stuff. I feel like that alone could have made its own film. And kind of same with the guy with the dead eyes, like that theoretically could have been its own film. But that always happens with anthology, or not anthology. Yeah, that always happens with films with ensemble casts, that there are inevitably going to be those stories that you latch on to more than others. Like even in David and I were talking off hours, and ones that I referenced were Boogie Nights and Magnolia, to Paul Thomas Anderson films, and in those films, some people have argued that some of the stories are more interesting than, I think that they're a lot more interesting and that they're less random. They all kind of fit a central theme, but even that being said, there are inevitably going to be characters that individual viewers latch onto more than other ones, and that's just, you know, subjective, but still, that happens a lot. But in this instance, I feel like it's very uneven in its storytelling and in the kinds of characters it has, and it's not really about anything other than the greater aspirations that one has while living in a harsh existence, and kind of how reality comes crashing down on you, which is, I mean, that's kind of a general theme, but it's not quite as focused as it is in Boogie Nights, Magnolia, or even something like Happiness, which is very bleak. Despite the title, it's a very bleak film, but even there, I feel like the stories and the themes are a bit more, and they have a better structure.
Okay. Brandon, if there's anything that you can bring into the Koei or to suggest as one of your favorite scenes from.
I mean, to me, it was all. I mean, as has already been said, and one of my favorites is the about the basically the story of the man and his son. I mean, the fact that just that telling, of course, that has more of a personal thing for me. I mean, I used to have an uncle who was taken because of alcoholism, but I remember as a child, he always used to tell me stories of things that we would do when he managed to get over things and back on track. And I thought to myself, this is very similar to those types of stories that many of them tell. Okay. It's that characterization that always, to me, a movie with very strong characters and character development usually gets my attention, just like a lot of books. That's why I'm a Stephen King fan, as a matter of fact, because just because his characterization is so well done. You know, that's the thing I liked about that film, and like I said, that was one of my favorite storylines in that.
Red Raven, if you could say anything about the cultural, what you could say about some of the Japanese customs that you might have noticed during the film, what would you say on some of the things that were going on there? I mean, obviously, in Japan, one of the customs is to place your shoes outside your door, you know, bow really low. Did you notice any of those things in there?
Yeah. I noticed some of those things. This movie, it was just it was hard to watch. I haven't watched very many foreign films, so I haven't really watched a whole lot of movies with subtitles. So it was hard to like read and then be watching the movie at the same time.
Okay.
So, but it was a slower movie, so it was easier to watch in that kind of a sense.
Okay.
But yeah, I understand what you're saying. But it was, I mean, at the end, it was more depressing, like, because you find out that little boy dies, and then you find out the niece, like attacks someone with, like, a butter knife, and...
It was a butcher knife.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was in... Did you catch that part? He was in a coma for, like, a week.
Yeah. Which one criticism I would have about the film on that level is, well, two things. I mean, I assume that his wounds have healed somewhat by that time, enough where he can walk and all that when we see him again.
It wasn't quite clear the time frame the movie took place around, so it could have been several months.
Well, that was my next point, was that not only within the story very unclear, but also it was very unclear to me what time period the film was set in at all, because I know that in Japan, at least at that time, and probably to a certain degree now, that ties into David's earlier question about certain traditions, you see that the men and women wear more, like some of them wear more traditional kimonos, some of them have more contemporary style of dress, and contemporary being 1970. And then you see sort of in between the two, because there's a certain formal but sort of westernized dress that you see in Japanese culture. You know, especially like the air of professionalism that the tram person um, tries to have about him is reminiscent of that. Um, but even and I'm sure that was very intentional to have a mixture of old and new. It just again, it's another layer to have to get through when you're assessing a film of a very different culture that's, you know, clearly not your own necessarily. But yeah, that was very unclear. But I think as a one of the things that the Japanese film Ringu, which was, you know, obviously what the American The Ring was based on, one of the things that it touched on was sort of the differences between the urbanized Tokyo culture and other like large cities in Japan. The differences between the Tokyo culture and the more rural outside of the cities and on some of the smaller islands and things like that. And on those smaller islands, that you can see them wear more traditional styles of dress, whether they're full blown kimonos or something similar, um, or you know, just working in houses that are more traditionally built. You know, things like that. It's kind of like if we were to go to a farmland today, you'd see like the flannel shirts and like the overalls and stuff, or at least that's kind of like the stereotypical depiction. But I do think that to a certain degree, as far as customs go, that there is of tradition while also having a keen eye for modernism, because apparently Tokyo is like the technology city these days. Like it's many years ahead of the rest of the world, from what I've heard.
What did anyone think about the situation of the comb maker and his
his kids?
His kids, and the situation where evidently not all of the children were his, and evidently no matter what, it seemed like he treated them more like his kids, regardless.
That was
a bizarre subplot.
It was bizarre. It didn't really go anywhere, but it was kind of sweet at the same time, because, I mean, he basically was saying that no matter what, they're still his kids, and he treats them just the same. And you know, it seemed like it was kind of a bright spot in otherwise bleak situation. And I think part of it is sort of the idea that you're I forget. Yeah, like there's a book out there. It's called Happiness is a Choice, you know, and it's obviously, to me, it's not as easy as that. But the idea behind it is that your ability to affect how you feel about different events in your life, that can help shape your present feelings of happiness and your present feelings of
Your state of mind.
and
Like
your
the book
ability
The
to.
Secret. You've
Yeah.
ever heard of that?
Yeah, I mean, but the point is, like, I feel like with him, it's like, regardless of the facts of how they came to be, he's still going to treat them like his own. And the characters all throughout the story are trying to grapple with the past or with their present circumstances, and they are all kind of deluding themselves in various ways. Some of it's more explicit, some of it's more implicit, and it's just more, I guess it's kind of a metaphor for the fact that all of us have a certain degree of self-deception in order to survive, in the sense that if we thought about our own existence too much, we would be impaired and we wouldn't be able to function. So, you know, I think it's trying to speak to that point. But for him, it's a pleasant experience because it's rooted in love, as opposed to you know, other people who try to isolate themselves and forget, you know, like the man with the dead eyes, what he does, and then other people try to this segues into what I wanted to talk about next. But the tram person who believes that he actually has this route that he has to go on and everything like that. Which my next point was going to be: did any of us think that that character was mentally disabled?
Oh, it was pretty clear.
I thought it
was almost a metaphor for self-delusion.
Yeah, which only in his case it's not really a choice, but it. I was just curious because I remember reading that on Wikipedia, just trying to see if there was like any official consensus for such a thing, and the plot synopsis didn't officially say that, but it also said that in other critical analyses of the film that other people have made that argument, which to me it's fairly clear, but I just was curious.
Well, if you remember in the beginning of the film, when his mother was screaming the chant to Buddha, he came in and it's almost like he was asking Buddha to make his mother smarter. So it was almost as if he was thinking that he was smarter than his mother.
And also when he tries to imitate her, his movements are more wild, more erratic, more unrestrained, which, depending on the kind of mental handicap that certain people may have, that you can have similar things happen. And it does there was a slight Forrest Gump feel to it, in the sense of like he lives his life and people perceive him as being a weirdo or an idiot or whatever, and then when he has his own form of wisdom, in the sense that he's perfectly happy with living in his fantasy world, and he thinks other people have it wrong and that kind of stuff, which isn't exactly what Forrest deals with, but the point is that it's how they see the world versus how other people see them.
Celeste,
yes.
Did you have some kind of an idea what might have been behind the trolley man's reality of things? I know we heard from Dane, but what do you think his mindset was, and do you think that there was a connection between him and the stories that went on within the film?
I think there was a connection, just that he kept coming up over and over again, like his thing. And it seemed like everyone was kind of like, he kept doing the same thing, and a lot of other people just kept doing the same thing, or, in the same lives. And we see him as being crazy or not in touch with reality, but really you could relate that to any of the characters in a way they act in certain respects.
Okay. Katie, do you have an idea of what might have been one of your favorite scenes in the film?
I guess I don't really have a favorite. There were certain elements that I liked, certain characters that I definitely liked the trolley character guy.
Did you
I liked the little boy.
Did you notice anything about like some of the buildings that some of the people might have been in?
I just really dug how everything was so colorful, but yet it was still like the slums or whatever.
Okay.
I really dug that. It like that was one of those things that reminded me of Street Trash, how colorful the surroundings were and how many little intricate things that there kind of were. And I liked also the really generic effects of the dad and the son imagining their dream house. I liked the dream house. It's like, ooh, I hope they go in there, but they never did.
Well, actually, one interesting observation about that is, if you notice that as the dream house gets built, that the colors get more kind of pinkish and kind of sunsetish in their colors scheme. And then as the son dies of food poisoning and a lot of the plot points start to come to a head, the
Another
colors.
thing I was going to mention is what did everyone think about the once the food poisoning set in? What did you think of the coloring?
That was crazy. It's like, oh yeah, he'll be fine. He just needs to rest. He looks like he's in Dawn of the Dead. What are you talking about?
Two things about that. One, well, the point I was trying to finish there was the fact that the colors when he actually dies are that same sunset kind of colors, set of colors. So it's like the reality sets upon them as his life comes to an end. As far as the skin colors of the father and son, traditionally, this is something I've learned from some other Japanese films I've seen, and also just other aspects of culture that I know from Japan. One of the things that when a character is dying or dead, or in some other something having to do with either death or ghosts or anything or zombies, anything like that, their skin color tends to turn to white and kind of like a sickly white. That I think comes from kabuki theater, where you'd see the ghosts with that sickly white look, kind of the creepy buggy eyes, that kind of stuff. So that
maybe.
Well, it has in other words, it has a root in their culture that the looks for certain, we have kind of our own traditions of the way that certain kinds of stock characters, or we have our own ways of depicting those things in the West, and that's just an aspect of it. It translates over to cinema, and then I saw this one film. I can't remember what it was, but it was I think it was Kawaii-den or something like that. It was the anthology of traditional Japanese ghost stories. Kawaii-den, yeah.
Yes.
But in there, the characters that are ghosts or are close to dying or under the influence of spirits or whatever, they have that same color. So it's not exactly meant to look realistic, but it gets the point across, and they also I think tend to be a bit more forgiving for theatricality in serious dramatic work than we do in the West all the time.
So Dustin, what did you think of the knowing that this was actually the first color film that Akira Kurosawa had actually ever done? Because before the films had always been in black and white. This was his first two Technicolor, some kind of colorization in his films. So ultimately, what did you think of the coloration? And since you tend to notice things about the surroundings, what did you think about the different buildings that
the buildings for me blended into the background? Like they were very much the same as the landscape. At least that was the impression I got.
Okay.
So it seemed like they were just part of the landscape. It seemed like the things that happened inside the buildings were just part of the landscape. It's like they weren't meant to stand out, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I did notice a few other things though, like with the dream sequences, like color with the dream house, colors were very vivid, and it was meant to show a break from reality. And then as the film started to wind down, you notice more and more sunset hues.
Okay.
And also, kind of a funny thing, like the two guys who wife swapped, they appeared to have color-coded houses and wife outfits. Like the one girl, she had the yellow shirt with the black like squirrels, and their house was like yellow with black lines. Like, I noticed stuff like that, and I was looking like, haha.
I thought this movie was very artistically done, though, with all the coloring and all of the different cultural things. I thought they did pretty well on that.
Yeah, I would have to say that too, and that ties into Brandon's idea that this is more of an artistic film person,
Well, and that's
an
the thing.
artistic
Like,
film that he probably
well,
normally did.
one thing I would say with this is like, I thought it was definitely a slog to sit through, but I mean, a lot of art house films are that way, and that doesn't mean they're bad. It's just a style. It's just a style.
Well,
What? Well,
The vibe, the way the anthology was put together, because it is kind of an anthology. So, the kind of the vibe
effectively
it is, believe it or not, even though this one is a hell of a lot more discombobulated. I remember Trick or Treat, the anthology. And I was thinking of how overlapped some of the stories were going in that film, and how overlapping some of these films were. Some of these stories were overlapping. Kind of just, instead of having this section and this section and this section, just having it go as all one continuous film.
Which do the Right Thing does that very, very well. And there are certain types of characters I noticed that were similar in both films. Obviously, this one came first, but you had kind of the Greek chorus of women washing here, and then you had the Greek chorus of the three men just sitting on the corner just talking.
It made it harder to follow, definitely.
Well, the one thing that I know my fiance always, I try to get my fiance to watch films that have subtitles, and she's like, "But I don't really want to read a darn thing. I want to watch the film." I'm like,
"Well, you can't watch it dubbed, because then it's so. Oh, I hate dubs."
And unfortunately, in the artistic. You got to watch it in their original language, in a sense.
Well, there's a music to the language.
I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, part of the watching of Godzilla films, part of the fun of it was watching them dubbed, and watching them. The lips move, and then all of a sudden, like 5 minutes later, you hear the dubbed parts on the VHS.
I grew up on Godzilla movies and never noticed that.
Oh yeah, I grew up on Godzilla movies too, and I guess I was just kind of used to it. I knew that it was in a foreign language and that was what they did. But nowadays, as an adult, I cannot watch movies that are dubbed because they just sound so horrible. Because the people who are dubbing them have to work in their lines in a short time span. It's so clear that they're in a sound studio, so the audio has that very contained, obviously, booth kind of sound to it, and it just comes off as so phony and awful. Not anime dubs though, because those tend to be better.
And the reason why I mentioned
the Italian ones aren't
the reason why I mentioned the Godzilla films is because if you noticed, this was actually
Toho,
from Toho, which is
I saw that. Yeah, I was like, oh, cool, it's stuck into Smash.
Which is the Godzilla connection, because that's the company.
They're still around.
Yep, they are, and that's the company that put out Godzilla. So. It was. I think it was a little different, and it might have been. Brandon, do you know if that was the only film that he did with Toho?
I don't know. I admit I don't pay as much attention to a lot of the makers themselves sometimes with that particular company. Though I do know it was one of the more popular companies at the time.
Yeah.
So.
It would be
still a big deal today.
see how many connections to the Godzilla company, Toho, that Akira Kurosawa might have had with any of his films, like maybe Redbeard or some of those, like The Hidden Fortress or something like that. Because The Hidden Fortress was technically what people believe that George Lucas somewhat based some of his Star Wars trilogy on, per se. And like we've mentioned before, the Seven Samurai, they that film was supposedly the basis storyline to the Magnificent Seven. So that's why I eventually wanted to, down the road, do like a Seven Samurai or Hidden Fortress type of thing.
Well,
so
I mean, Kurosawa had a lot of connections that people were ripping off. Well, not necessarily ripping off, but using his films as inspiration for their own. Not just
Yojimbo.
Yeah, like Yojimbo, and their connection to the spaghetti westerns.
Yeah, most definitely. So I mean, that is why in the U.S. it seems like Akira Kurosawa's films had more of an influence. You know,
that happens. You know, certain filmmakers catch fire in different countries for whatever reason.
Just like recently, I heard in China, the new Black Panther film was.
Oh my God! I had trouble believing that article until I saw like
what?
version.
Yeah, I didn't hear the last part. What is it?
It's hard to explain without sounding terrible.
Was it not well received in China?
In fact,
they said the movie was too dark.
It had too much black. Too much black. Too much black, I believe.
Well,
there was a headline that ran in China that said that it had too much blackness or something to that effect.
Well, they censor movies that they get from America, and so I don't exactly trust their standards.
Judgment.
Yeah, I don't trust their judgment, considering that they have to censor literally everything that they get from the West. So, yeah.
Well, supposedly the newest Star Wars movie didn't last very long or make very much there. So
Nah.
I'll give them something for that. I mean.
Well, I can understand why it didn't because it
was awful.
No, it was great. I loved it.
Kill the writer.
Well, the central conflicts of that film are very non-physical and they're very based in language, so those tend to be harder to translate, especially if you have a government that kind of forbids most things that would make for a good sci-fi or fantasy film. They forbid those kind of fantastical ideas in their films, so it's a little hard to communicate those, admittedly.
The next question I'm going to ask the group is now, since some of you have now seen a film with subtitles, would you watch a film with subtitles in the future?
Yes, I watch a ton of them.
Well, yeah.
Some people don't like reading while watching, but
some people don't like reading in general, which is why our country's in the state that it's in.
Yeah.
I actually turn the subtitles on all the time when I watch movies because I sometimes don't hear it really well, or I like to have the confirmation in case I miss something or I'm watching it when everyone's listening.
That's what I do too.
Because
yeah, I'm kind of used to it.
I tend to get into a lot of subtitled movies myself because Godzilla to start off with, but going from those type of films. But I've often gotten into a lot of avant-garde films through some of the channels and avenues that I've been able to watch them in. I watched The King of Masks at the Oriental back when it came out. That was in I believe in the late 90s. That was a story about a little girl who was kind of grew up as an orphan, and she learned how to make these masks from this old man, and eventually she went into met like the king of China or something like that, and it was just kind of a interesting film. So, but films like that were in subtitles, and I kind of got used to watching films like that. So, alrighty. So, did anyone else have anything else to add?
It was the first Kurosawa film, and after finding out that it's not necessarily typical of his works, I kind of want to try some more Kurosawa films at some point.
Okay.
Not for the show, and not right now.
Well, we can definitely check them out more down the line. More down the line. I was thinking definitely checking out some of his more well-known works down the road, just to see what's how they influenced some of the films here. So, but I figure we'll skip around a little bit. Did anyone else have any ideas as to a future film?
We should do something really, really different.
Let's
than what
do
we've been
Feed.
doing.
We just did something
I was thinking
different.
of something like old, something older, like maybe Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Yes, that's
Nailed
my
it.
favorite. That's my favorite Universal music.
Old Universal stuff.
I want to see Shape of Water, so we could totally do Creature from the Black Lagoon to like prep me for that.
Let's do Creature from the Black Lagoon then.
Yes.
Fuck yeah!
We'll go old school, and then we'll shoot back to maybe a trauma film the following week, or go back to Feed, since that'll be when Celeste will be with us.
Yay.
What the hell is Feed?
It's
One of my favorite movies.
What?
It's one of my favorite movies.
When did it come out?
A while ago. It's like it was within my lifetime, but I don't know, sometime in the 2000s.
Was it that one that was done through Project Greenlight?
I don't know.
Too many questions.
It was an After Dark film. Or After Dark. I know I digitalized it, so we'll have to. I'll send you guys a copy of it then, if you don't have it. In any case, let's start with Celeste. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you do?
All right, I'm Celeste. I am a co-host on the Horror Host TV show, Dodes'ka-den Dark Coffin Classics. You can find us if you're in the Milwaukee area, or if you're in Racine, Kenosha. You can find us on Channel 14 in Kenosha, or Channel 25 in Racine. Otherwise, you can find us on Vimeo at vimeo.com/ddcc.
Okay. Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from?
Sure. I am Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a body positive horror artist and alternative model. And you can find my pictures on Instagram at Third Eye Open. That's 3RDEYE0PEN. I'm also the makeup artist for horror punk band Ratbat Spider. And you can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com. And I am a dead Girl for Dodes'ka-den Dark Coffin Classics. As Celeste mentioned, you can find them at vimeo.com/ddcc. And I'm a performer and producer for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions. And you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/grindhousetees. You can also find us at Frank's Power Plant on April 28th with Slaughter Party, Size 5s, and Beaker for Dead on the Dance Floor.
Awesome. Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and where you're from?
Yes, I run a YouTube channel called Septon versus the World. I am dedicated to physical media, pretty much all types of physical media, but mostly movies. And we do pick up videos, updates on what's coming out in the future, and then, of course, our various vlogs. We just finished up our award season synopsis, and we're hoping to start off our new season with some fun stuff. Our next week's going to be dedicated to, well,
I hear
to,
a kitty.
cats apparently, but to movies
They wanted
that we
to review a movie. But in any case, very cool, man. Definitely check out his YouTube channel, Septon versus the World. Red Raven, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm Red Raven, and I'm from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I book shows in the Milwaukee area, and I am also on Dodes'ka-den Dark Coffin Classics.
Woohoo!
Awesome. Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from, and why don't you tell us a little bit more about your big blind short?
That's right. Well, I'm Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And as David mentioned, I had a short film called The Big Blind just come out, or rather just get finished. And it's a film noir short throwback. And then I was looking into some festivals to send it to the other night. And it's got Lloyd Kaufman in it, Lloyd Kaufman of Trauma that we were just discussing, and it's been very well received so far. Just trying to get the journey going, and I'm also going to have a short film called The Slaughtering Ground be included in the upcoming horror anthology film For We Are Many, which will be put out by Hex Media, and they did The Black Gloves recently, and The Unkindness of Ravens, and Lord of Tears.
Do you have any idea of when that anthology might be greenlighted to go out to the public yet?
More than likely it'll be sometime in the fall, because I know that they're trying to shoot the last update I heard was the other day. They are wanting to shoot the wraparound segment, preferably with a great horror star. They're going to want to shoot that in May. They're still trying to lock someone down, but once they get that shot, then they'll be able to formally get the film together, get it to some festivals, get it sent out on physical media, and out on streaming and that kind of stuff after that. But I was able to talk about it and my inclusion in it, so that's why I'm bringing it up, just to get people pumped up for it.
Okay, cool, man. Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from?
Oh, right. I live in Milwaukee. I collect horror movies and horror movie everything. I have an Instagram where I show this stuff off. DHR Hunter, all one word. So, the idea, Dustin Horror Hunter. And that's more or less it for me. I'm going to be writing some movie reviews over my upcoming spring break here. And you can find those on the Movies Galore blog.
Awesome. And I'm your host, David Streggy. I run Inside Movies Galore. I also run Movies Galore Milwaukee, the group, as well as a blog. And I'm also a small-time producer. One of the features that is coming out this summer, hopefully, is a Wrestle Massacre. So definitely check that out. Coming out in 2018. I also produced a Friday the 13th fan film called Friday the 13th Legacy, which just recently came out. So definitely see if you can't track that down at Catch Me Kill Me Productions booth table at any of these horror conventions.
What if we can neither catch you nor kill you? What happens then?
I guess I just keep on killing people. You cannot stop me. Anyways, but stay tuned. Next week we have a great lineup of films to talk about over the next weeks. We have chosen Creatures from the Black Lagoon. So stay tuned and definitely like and subscribe our channel. And thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Everyone say good night.
Good night.